So we're going to be just talking a bit about the history of storytelling in the library, and certainly storytelling in new media. And I feel incredibly fortunate to be doing it this afternoon with Marielle. One of the things that when I first started as a librarian, I was in the Scarborough Public Libraries. And I was, of course, before I became a librarian, I was a clerk in circulation. And I can remember being at the circ desk, and they had videotaped a librarian telling a story. And it was Eva Martin telling a story called Soap. Now, I can't tell the story of Soap because it's just not a story that I'm really comfortable with. But as I was standing at the circ desk, I watched this video of somebody telling a story. And I thought, this is amazing. I was totally drawn in. It was partly because, work at the circ desk wasn't all that scintillating. But I was totally sucked into this story. And I, left the circ desk and went over and watched this woman tell a story. And it was mesmerizing. I was totally entranced and thought, okay, I want to know more about storytelling. I had never heard a storyteller as a child, to the best of my knowledge. Of course, we always had family stories, but I had never heard somebody tell a story to be told from beginning to end. And as soon as I became a librarian, I went and took a course at the Toronto Public Library. Scarborough didn't have the same rich history in storytelling that the Toronto Public Library did. I was really lucky in that I was able to take a course with Alice Kane. I then took a course with Rita Cox, and I continued on with storytelling and took courses with the Storyteller School of Toronto, and there it was really fun because I thought I was taking a course with Dan Yashinsky, and I got to the storytelling, and there were too many people, and we were told that because there were so many, we couldn't all be in a class with Dan Yashinsky, so some of us were being sent to another room, and I got Joan Bodger. Now, I don't know whether any of you have ever heard Joan Bodger, or know Joan Bodger, or knew Joan Bodger. I sort of looked at Dan, who's a very good-looking young man, and thought, I don't get him. Instead, I get this crusty old woman who looked like incredibly nasty that evening. And so I went in to take a course with Joan, and what I would say is it created a friendship that I cherish, and certainly got me more involved in storytelling than I ever thought possible. When I started telling stories, I remember going to the Toronto Public Library and hearing Marielle in one of the storytelling events. I had never heard anyone tell, up until then, a story in 2 languages, somebody who was so engaging, so much fun, enthusiastic, and it was just a treat. And the nice thing is, Marielle and I last year were invited, 2 years ago, were invited by the Miami Public Library to be part of an exchange. So we went down and told stories to various different audiences in Miami as part of their storytelling in the library. And it's been a treat to work with Marielle. And I'm just going to turn it over to Marielle to talk, because she came from the Toronto Public Library, where they really did have. And I'll just say that it's very funny. I'm sure that many of you have gone to the Lillian H. Smith branch of the Toronto Public Library. Well, if you haven't, you must go. It's one of the jewels in Toronto. There isn't any question. It's a beautiful building. The Osborne collection is spectacular. It's well worth the trip. But Joan and I were friends for many years, and I only knew her as this tough old broad. And I don't even think that she'd mind me calling her a tough old broad. She called herself the Crone of Church Street because she walked with a great walking stick, about a 6-foot hazel rod, and as she went anywhere, she commanded your attention. I didn't know her past life, and the fact that she had had a family. She had 2 children and a husband, and she went to Britain to look at the sites of British children's literature, and from that trip, she wrote a book called How the Heather Looks. And with How the Heather Looks, it's a beautiful book of a family going to Britain to take a look at the Sykes of British children's literature. But when she came back and started writing the book, her daughter Lucy got ill, and it was discovered she had a brain tumor, and she died. And at the same time, her husband his schizophrenia was becoming much more apparent, and she had problems with him, and her son Ian became schizophrenic, and he disappeared. So her life took a great change in a difficult time, but she certainly survived all of that and started a new life in Toronto, partly as a storyteller, partly as a Gestalt therapist. And that's when I knew her. And she had already had a second husband who had also died, and she had his ashes that she had to deal with. And she had always promised him that she would scatter his ashes in the building site for the new opera house. But that was before this new opera house, and they had canceled the opera house, and so she still had his ashes. And one rainy, cold day, she called me, and she had had an accident. Because of the accident, she knew that she better deal with her husband's ashes. Because if she didn't, they'd be left in the locker in her apartment building. And she wanted them dealt. So she called me up. She said, Ken, you gotta help me. Gotta deal with Alan's ashes. And decided that they were just building the William H. Smith branch of the Toronto Public Library. And the big hole was done. She told me to bring my car, and we'd go over and scatter. Well, we dump Alan's ashes. We can't scatter them, just pouring all the way around the building site. And so we got to this building site, and I knew if any of us is going to climb over, it's going to be me. I was not in a great mood, but it was also kind of solemn. Here she was with her husband's ashes, and we're walking up to this building site, and it's just all this hoarding around it. And we had to walk around the building. We went with the sun. We did not go with shins, but we went and looked for the perfect spot where the box was open and Alan's ashes were then thrown over this fence. And I will always remember walking away from the hole in the ground, and we had this box and paper, and on the paper and box it was written, "These are the remains of Alan Nelson Mercer." And I said to Joan, don't worry about this. I'll take care of these. You don't have to worry. She said, no, you're not going to have to say everything goes together. She stepped back, heaved over the hoarder, and we left. Well, that was all well and good, and I didn't work for the Toronto Public Library at the time, and I was glad I didn't. And the really funny thing was, she wrote this in a story, and it was picked up by Saturday Night Magazine. So Saturday Night Magazine held on to the story for years. They didn't publish it, and they did, and the story is like, way over, it's an amazing story because it's a love story about Joan and her second husband, and why she's dealing with his ashes. I get a call from Saturday Night Magazine and said, Ken Setterington, yes, how old are you? And it's like, well, why does that matter? And they said, oh, well, no, because Joe Bogers mentioned you in the story, and we're fact checking. And we want to make sure that you are 30 years younger than Joe Bogers. I said, yes, I'm 30 years younger. They said, fine. At that point, I was working for the Toronto Public Library. Saturday Night Magazine was being distributed in the Globe and Mail, and I had just been named Children's Youth Advocate, reporting directly to the chief, Joe Bryan. So I discovered that on a Friday, in the Saturday Globe, we're going to have this story with me helping Joe scatter these ashes in the other side of the new library. And so I sort of thought, okay, do I mention this? And I thought, well, Joe does not like surprises. So I went in to see Joe, and some of you I know Joe Bryan. So I went in to see Joe. I said, Joe, I just have to tell you, there is a story that's going to be published on the weekend. And it has me scattering ashes underneath what is now the William H. Smith branch. And I want you to know it's a true story. And it mentions, it doesn't mention me by first and last name. And Joe said to me, that's and I always remember she sort of had this thing where she got, was pulling her hair. And she just said, oh, thanks for telling me, Ken. I could tell she was really annoyed. But I thought, well, there's nothing I can do. It was like years later. And the only untruth in the story was Joan said that she'd always wanted to see a blue butterfly. And in the story, she let herself see a blue butterfly. Everything else was true. Well, the story goes out, people read it in the Saturday Night magazine. I was quite pleased it was there. But on Monday, I sort of went into work and thought, okay, what's going to happen? What's the reaction? And the amazing thing was the chair of the library board read the story on the weekend and thought it was the most moving love story that he had read. He thought it was wonderful, and he called into Joe and just said, what a fabulous story. What a great piece of history we have for the library. And so I was totally saved. There's no question. I don't know that, of course, it is illegal to be scattering ashes, et cetera, et cetera. And I am, I was so pleased to be part of that. And so if you do read the book, The Crack in the Teacup, you will see, because there is a chapter that was published in Saturday Night magazine, and it does talk about me risking life and limb, which is a bit of an exaggeration, I will admit. But we did scatter Alan's ashes. And when we signed the guest book in the Osborne collection, it's on a little book stand. And on the book stand, there's a little brass plaque that says Alan Nelson Mercer. He could write a good sentence. And that was what Joan donated to the library in memory of her husband. And now I'm going to hand it back to Marielle, because I just have to say, whenever I'm talking about storytelling and I think of Joan, that image on that cold day, scattering Alan's ashes, just leaps to mind. One of the other projects that I've been involved in, and I'm trying to remember, were you part of the Iliad or the Odyssey stories?
I was part of the last one, which was, I did the Odyssey to Rome. Yeah.
Because there's a group it started in Ottawa, where it was decided that we would tell epic. So we went for a weekend, and we told first the Odyssey, from beginning to end. Started on Friday night, and we would break every hour or two, and we would told Friday night, we told all day Saturday, and we told on Sunday. And people came from all over to hear it, because there isn't very often the opportunity to hear a told story that was created, that was written down from a told story. And so we had classic scholars that flew in to hear this story. It was quite amazing. And you needed different voices, because goodness knows, it's still a long time to sit. And I remember when I was working in the reference library, and there used to be a needlepoint shop, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to sit for 3 days without having something in my hands. And so I went and got a needle, the woman in the shop said, oh, you've never done this before, you might want to start with a bookmark. I said, I'm going to be there all weekend and need more than a bookmark. I'm going to be braiding grass if I don't have something. So I got a big pillow project. I'd never done it before, but as I was sitting there over the weekend, I got half of it done. It was amazing, though, to understand more about storytelling from that experience. One of the things that I learned, I'd always been told, you have to see the story in your mind and to be able to tell the story. And there were storytellers, I think there were 40 of us, and we each had about an hour. So it was a big event, and even the commitment to hear the story was a commitment.